The courtroom held the kind of silence that presses against your chest. Caleb Ryan stood perfectly still as the judge read the petition aloud, a motion to terminate his parental rights, filed because he could not pay a hospital bill. Every pair of eyes in that room had already decided what kind of man he was. The opposing attorney smiled with the quiet confidence of someone who had never once lost. Her file was thick, her argument was clean, and the verdict was 30 seconds away. Then the courtroom door swung open. A woman walked in composed, powerful, expensive in a way that made the air shift. Nobody knew why she was there. Not until she spoke. Stay until the end. Her condition is the last thing anyone in that room, or anywhere, expected to hear. Caleb Ryan was 32 years old and had the kind of face that looked older than it should, not from vanity or neglect, but from the particular weight that accumulates in a man who has spent years carrying more than one person's worth of life. His jaw was angular, his hands were calloused. And when he smiled, which was not often anymore, something warm flickered through the exhaustion like a match held against the wind. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. Monday through Friday, he was on the loading dock at a regional freight company, lifting, stacking, moving. On weekends, he picked up side work fixing cars in the parking lot of an auto parts store, cash jobs, no contracts, word of mouth. He was good with engines. He understood how things broke and how to put them back together. He just had never figured out how to apply that same logic to his own finances. His wife, Dana, had died 14 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, diagnosed in October, and gone by the following spring. She had been 31 years old. She had left behind a 6-year-old daughter, a rented 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, and a stack of medical bills so tall it seemed architectural. Caleb had not known what to do with the grief, so he had folded it into the debt and carried them together. Mia was 6 now. She had Dana's eyes large and dark and serious, and she carried a stuffed rabbit named Cotton everywhere she went. Cotton had one ear that hung lower than the other, and a faded patch on his belly where the fabric had worn through from too much holding. Mia held him constantly. At the dinner table, in the car, in the waiting room at the clinic where she went every 3 weeks for the infusion therapy that kept her rare autoimmune condition from progressing. Caleb sat beside her every single time, reading to her from whichever paperback he'd picked up from the donation bin at the library. The condition was manageable, the doctors said. With consistent treatment, Mia could lead a full and healthy life. The emphasis, always, was on the word consistent. Skip a session, delay a dose, and the inflammation would return. Her joints would swell, her energy would drop. The disease would take back every inch they'd won. So Caleb did not miss appointments. He rearranged his schedule around them, traded shifts, drove 40 minutes each way in a truck with a cracked windshield and a heating system that worked only on one side. Jessica Carter had never met Caleb Ryan before the lawsuit, but she had read his file with the clinical detachment of someone sorting receipts. She was the senior litigation attorney for Meridian Health Systems, the hospital network that had treated Dana during her final months and had since continued Mia's care. Jessica was 38, sharp in the way of instruments, and she did not dislike Caleb. She simply did not think of him as a person. He was a liability line item. He owed $240,000 in outstanding medical debt, and the interest was compounding at a rate that made the number essentially fictional. The city around them was the kind of place where money had long since decided who belonged where. The hospitals were excellent. The specialists were world-class. The bills were designed to be paid by insurance companies or by people who had enough zeros behind their name that the math didn't frighten them. Caleb had neither. What he had was a daughter who needed a doctor and a will that could bend almost infinitely, but not quite all the way. The summons arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a white envelope with the hospital's return address in the upper left corner. And Caleb's first thought was that it was another bill. He was wrong. He stood in the hallway of his apartment, still wearing his work jacket, and read the document 3 times before he understood what it was. Meridian Health Systems, acting through its legal representatives, was petitioning the family court on the grounds that he was financially unable to provide adequate medical care for his minor child. The proposed remedy, buried in legal language that took him 2 readings to decode, was a transfer of custodial authority to the state pending a suitable placement. They were asking a judge to take Mia away from him. He sat down on the floor of the hallway. He did not cry. He stared at the document until the words stopped meaning anything. And then he folded it carefully and put it back in the envelope. Mia appeared in the doorway of her room, holding Cotton by one ear. She had heard him come home. "Daddy," she said, studying his face with the precise attention children have when they know something is wrong but don't know its shape yet. "Are you okay?" He told her he was fine. He managed a version of a smile. She stood there a moment longer, then padded back to her room in her socks. That night, after she was asleep, he sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad and tried to write down his options. He had no money for an attorney. The legal aid office had a waiting list 4 months long. A neighbor's cousin who had passed the bar exam 3 years ago agreed to look at the summons and called back 40 minutes later to say it was above his experience level. Caleb thanked him and hung up. He thought about the previous year. He had sold his television, his power tools, a guitar he'd had since college. He had taken every overtime shift available. He had eaten peanut butter sandwiches 4 nights a week to save on groceries. He had done the math obsessively in a notebook he kept by the bed, calculating and recalculating, as though the numbers might eventually rearrange themselves into something survivable. They never did. Dana's treatments had cost what they had cost. Mia's ongoing care cost what it cost. The gap between what he earned and what was owed was not a gap he could close by working harder. He had already tested the limits of harder. 3 days before the hearing, Mia sat beside him on the couch while he reviewed the summons one more time. She had been watching his face. "Daddy," she said quietly, "are they going to take me away?" He turned to look at her. The question was a blade. He did not know how she had understood enough to ask it. Children understand more than they are told, always, and for a long moment he could not find any words at all. Then he put his arm around her and said, as steadily as he could, that he was not going to let that happen. She pressed her face against his side and did not say anything else. Neither did he. Cotton sat on her lap, watching the room with his one good ear. The courtroom was on the 7th floor of the municipal building downtown, past a security checkpoint and a bank of elevators that smelled like old carpeting. Caleb arrived 20 minutes early in a collared shirt he had ironed twice and dark slacks he had borrowed from his neighbor. He had polished his shoes. He had combed his hair. He had done everything a person does when they are trying to look like someone who deserves something. Jessica Carter arrived with 2 associates, a paralegal, and a rolling briefcase. She wore a charcoal blazer and moved with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had been in this room many times before and had always left it the winner. She sat up at her table without looking at Caleb. Her associates arranged binders with collar-coded tabs. Caleb sat alone at the other table. He had a manila folder with copies of his pay stubs, a letter from Mia's doctor, and a handwritten list of every payment he had made toward the debt over the past 2 years. He had put it together himself at midnight, cross-referencing his bank statements with his own records. It was the most organized he had ever been about anything in his life, and looking at it now, across from those binders, he understood that it was not enough. Jessica's opening was 14 minutes long. She presented his income figures, his debt-to-income ratio, his lack of health insurance, and a projection model showing that at his current earnings trajectory, the outstanding balance would never be meaningfully reduced. She spoke without inflection, without cruelty, and without once looking at him. The facts, she implied, spoke with sufficient volume on their own. The judge, a man in his late 50s, with reading glasses on a chain, made notes without expression. When Caleb was given the opportunity to respond, he stood up and tried to explain what the numbers did not show. The hours he had worked, the appointments he had kept, what Mia meant to him. His voice was steady for the first 2 minutes. Then it wasn't. He stopped, took a breath, looked at the table. Jessica let a brief silence settle before she spoke again. Her voice was even, almost gentle, which made it worse. "Your Honor," she said, "love is not in dispute here. No one questions Mr. Ryan's affection for his daughter. But love cannot pay for an infusion. Love cannot cover the cost of a specialist. Love cannot replace the infrastructure that this child's medical condition requires." She paused. Love is not enough to keep a sick child alive. The room was very quiet. The judge wrote something on his notepad. Caleb looked at the table in front of him and said nothing. Because she was not wrong, and he knew it. And that knowledge was the worst part. He had built his entire defense on a truth that the system did not accept as currency. The judge was about to speak. He inhaled. He adjusted his glasses. And then the door opened. She did not hurry. That was the first thing anyone noticed. In a moment designed to draw attention, Eleanor Grace moved with a stillness that made the room rearrange itself around her, without her appearing to ask it to. She was 28 years old, though she read as older not from age but from a quality of deliberateness that most people spend decades failing to develop. Her coat was dark navy. Her heels were not extreme, but were precise. And she carried nothing in her hands. The bailiff stepped forward. She handed him a business card without breaking stride. He looked at it, looked at her, and stepped back. The judge lowered his glasses. "Miss Grace, this is an unexpected appearance. I apologize for the timing, Your Honor." Her voice was low, clear, unruffled. "I have a statement relevant to the matter before the court, and a proposal I believe warrants the court's attention before any decision is rendered." Jessica Carter had turned in her chair. For the first time since the proceedings began, something shifted in her expression, not quite alarm, but a recalibration. "Your Honor," opposing counsel would object. "Miss Carter." The judge's voice was quiet but final. "Let her speak." Eleanor stood at the center of the room. She did not look at Jessica. She looked at the judge. And then, for just a moment, she looked at Caleb. Something passed through her eyes, not pity, not apology, not warmth exactly, but something recognizant, as though she had seen him before in a way he had not seen her. "My name is Eleanor Grace. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Grace Medical Holdings, a privately held healthcare organization with partnership interests in several facilities throughout this region, including—" She paused a single beat. "Meridian Health Systems." The room shifted again. Jessica went very still. Eleanor continued, "I am prepared to assume full financial responsibility for the outstanding medical debt associated with Dana Ryan, deceased, and to establish a fully funded treatment account for Mia Ryan, sufficient to cover all required therapies, medications, and specialist consultations for the next decade. No interest. No conditions attached to the child's care. No liens against any future earnings." The judge set down his pen. "That is a significant offer, Miss Grace." "It is," she agreed, "and it comes with one condition." She said the word evenly, and the silence that followed it was the kind that a room full of people makes when every one of them holds their breath at the same instant. Caleb had not moved. He was looking at her with the expression of a man trying to understand whether he was being saved or traded. He wasn't sure those were different things. Eleanor Grace turned to face him directly for the first time. The rest of the room, the judge, the attorneys, the court reporter, became peripheral. "Mr. Ryan," she said, "I am offering to resolve every financial obstacle standing between you and your daughter's future. But in return, I need something from you." He waited. She did not make him wait long. "I need you to come to work for me, full-time, effective immediately." The position would be classified internally as a crisis operations liaison essentially. Someone who responds to urgent logistical and human situations within our facilities and extended network. The hours are irregular, the work is demanding, and you would be reporting directly to me, which means when I need something done, I need it done without question and without delay. The room breathed again, but uncertainly. It was not the condition anyone had been bracing for. It was stranger than that. Stranger and more specific. Jessica Carter spoke carefully. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." The judge looked at her, then at Eleanor, then at Caleb. He appeared to be deciding something. "The court will note," Eleanor said, still facing Caleb, "that this arrangement is voluntary. Mr. Ryan is under no legal compulsion to accept. The offer stands independent of these proceedings and would be formalized in a separate contract." Caleb's voice was rough when he finally used it. "Why me?" Eleanor paused. It was not a long pause, but it was deliberate. The pause of someone who has prepared an answer and is now choosing how much of the truth to put into it. "Because you are qualified," she said, "in ways you may not yet recognize." That was all she gave him. Later, standing in the hallway outside the courtroom while the judge recessed, Caleb pressed his back against the wall and ran the calculation in his head. If he refused, the hearing would resume. The judge would likely rule in Meridian's favor. and Mia would be removed from his home. That was the simple version of what he stood to lose. On the other side, a job he did not understand, for a woman whose motivations were not clear to him, with a contract he had not read, and a condition framed as opportunity, but structured like obligation. If he accepted, he would be employed. Mia would receive her treatments. The debt would dissolve, but he would belong, in some essential way, to Eleanor Grace's calendar. He thought about Mia in her room with Cotton, not knowing what was happening in this building. He thought about all the things he had told her he would not let happen. He walked back into the courtroom. He told the judge he accepted the offer. Eleanor Grace did not smile. She nodded once, as though something had arrived on schedule. Grace Medical Holdings occupied 6 floors of a glass tower in the financial district, which was 11 miles from the apartment where Caleb had spent the last 3 years eating peanut butter sandwiches. He drove there on his first Monday in a truck with a cracked windshield and parked in a structure where the attendant wore a vest with the company logo on it. He did not have a vest. His office, a real office with a door and a window that looked north, was on the 4th floor. A woman named Sandra, who had the precise and careful manner of someone who had survived several corporate administrations, showed him the filing systems, the communication protocols, and the emergency response database that he would be working from. She told him that the role had not existed in its current form before Miss Grace had created it 6 weeks ago. He was its first occupant. The work was not what he had expected, though he was not sure what he had expected. There were no crates to move, no engines to diagnose. Instead, there were situations. A supplier in the eastern region had shorted a shipment of dialysis filters, and Caleb spent a Tuesday afternoon tracking the logistics chain back to its origin point and negotiating a replacement on a 48-hour turnaround. A records digitization project at one of the affiliated clinics had created a data backlog affecting patient billing. Caleb spent 2 days working through the manual reconciliation with the clinic's administrative team. Each problem was human at its core. Each one required someone who could stay calm when the room got loud. He was, it turned out, very good at that. Eleanor watched him. Not constantly, not obtrusively, but in the way that observant people track things that matter to them briefly, repeatedly, with accumulating detail. When he solved the dialysis situation in less time than the operations director had projected, she was standing near the window when he filed the summary report. She did not comment on it. She read it and moved on. He noticed, though, and he began to pay closer attention to her in return. There was a precision to Eleanor Grace that went beyond professional training. She had clearly worked very hard to become someone who showed nothing she didn't intend to show. And the effort of it was almost visible if you watched long enough: the slight hesitation before certain words, the way her hand moved to her phone when a particular name came up in a meeting, the fact that she ate lunch at her desk every single day and always faced the door. What he saw was a woman running 2 simultaneous versions of the same company. The one that appeared in board presentations and annual reports, and a second, quieter version that she managed through a set of private communications he had not been authorized to see. He knew about this second version only because his role gave him access to scheduling and logistics systems, and certain calendar blocks appeared without names, without locations, with only a file number he did not recognize in the notes field. He had learned, over years of working jobs, where people didn't think to watch the guy doing the lifting, that silence makes people careless. He kept his silence, and he watched. Within his first 3 weeks, he had identified 3 things that did not fit. A series of internal transfers between subsidiary accounts that followed an unusual pattern, a contract with a data management firm that had been signed without going through the standard vendor review process, and a recurring approval signature on patient record access logs that belonged to an executive who had left the company 14 months ago. He wrote each observation in a personal notebook he kept in his jacket pocket and said nothing. It was a misfiled routing document that broke things open. Caleb found it on a Thursday evening, working late in the filing system while everyone else on the 4th floor had gone home. It was a legal routing slip, administrative on its face, attached to a contract amendment. The amendment referenced the original lawsuit against him, not the hospital's account of it, but the internal account. And the name on the authorizing signature was not Meridian Health Systems. It was a holding company called Arkway Consolidated Partners. He stared at the document for a long time. Then he began to pull threads. Arkway Consolidated was a minority shareholder group within Meridian's parent structure. They held enough equity to influence certain operational decisions but not enough to control the board outright. Over the preceding 18 months, they had been quietly acquiring insurance policy portfolios from smaller providers. Portfolios that, individually, were unremarkable, but which together represented a significant concentration of pediatric long-term care accounts. The kind of accounts that became very valuable if the public provider of record was displaced. Caleb was not a financial analyst, but he had spent enough time in the past 3 weeks learning the company's architecture that he could follow the logic when he saw it laid out. The lawsuit against him had not been a collection action. It had been a targeting mechanism. His daughter's case file, her treatment history, her ongoing care needs, all of it, was the kind of documentation that made a pediatric long-term care account enormously attractive to a private purchaser. Remove the parent, transfer the child to a state-managed placement, and the insurance processing rights transferred with it. They had tried to monetize Mia. He sat in the empty office for a long time with that thought. Then he picked up his notebook and went home to check on his daughter, who was asleep in her room with cotton tucked under one arm and the nightlight on. 2 days later, he understood why Eleanor had hired him. He found it in a personnel archive he had accessed to resolve an unrelated HR question. A photograph from a community event, 12 years old, taken at a fundraiser for an emergency services workers benefit program. The man in the photograph was being recognized for pulling a teenager from a vehicle after a highway accident. The teenager's name was not listed in the caption, but the man receiving the recognition had a face that matched the one in the framed photograph on Eleanor Grace's office wall, the one she kept turned slightly away from her desk, as though it were there for memory rather than display. Caleb had been 20 years old when it happened. He barely remembered it. He had been driving home from a night shift, and there had been a car in the ditch, and a girl inside it who had not been moving. He had not thought of it as heroism. He had thought of it as being the only person there. Eleanor Grace had been 16. The accident had damaged her right collarbone and kept her in a hospital for 3 weeks. The man who had pulled her out had never left a name. He had found her now. Or she had found him. He was not entirely sure which. He went to her office on a Friday afternoon and closed the door behind him. She was at her desk. She looked up without surprise, which told him she had been expecting this conversation. "You knew," he said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement, offered carefully. The way he might describe a mechanical problem before asking whether it could be fixed. Eleanor set down her pen. "Yes," she said. "You knew about Arkway before I found the routing document. I've known for 7 months. He pulled the chair across from her desk and sat down. "Then why haven't you stopped them?" She was quiet for a moment, in the way of someone choosing precision over speed. "Because knowing and proving are different things. Arkway operates through a layered structure, 3 subsidiaries, 2 of which are registered in jurisdictions that require international legal process to subpoena. Every piece of evidence I have found internally can be explained away individually. I needed the pattern. I needed someone who could move through this company's systems without triggering the alerts that a formal investigation would set off." She paused. "I needed someone who was already here for a reason that had nothing to do with corporate governance." "You used me," he said. "I gave you a way to stay with your daughter," she said. "And I needed something in return. Both of those things are true at the same time." He thought about that. He was a fair man. He had been put in an impossible position, but she had not created the position. She had found him already in it and offered him a door. He could be angry about the architecture of it. He was, a little, but anger was a luxury he had learned to budget carefully. "What do you need from me now?" he asked. She slid a folder across the desk. Inside it was a compiled record, transaction logs, contract amendments, routing slips, access timestamps, all organized in the precise sequence that would allow a forensic accountant to reconstruct exactly what Arkway had done. "I need you to testify," she said. "The documents came through systems you legitimately accessed. Your chain of custody is clean. Mine is not. I am an interested party with a conflict of interest. A judge would dismiss anything I submitted unilaterally." She met his eyes. "You have no conflict. You have a daughter." He took the folder. He opened it. He read the first page carefully, and then the second. And then he looked at her. "I'll do it," he said. But not just for Mia. She raised her head slightly. There are other people like me, he said. In debt they didn't choose, for illnesses they didn't ask for. If Arkway has been doing this to one case file, they've been doing it to others. I want that addressed. He set the folder back on the desk. All of it. Eleanor Grace looked at him for a long moment. Something in her face trained since she was a teenager to hold still, to reveal nothing, to keep the world at the length she chose, moved very slightly. It was not softness, exactly. It was more like recognition. All of it, she said. Yes, the emergency court hearing was filed on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, the State Financial Crimes Unit had initiated a parallel investigation based on the evidence package. By Wednesday morning, a federal auditor had been assigned to Meridian's parent structure. Caleb sat in a conference room and gave his statement for 4 hours, working through the documents one at a time, with the kind of methodical patience he had developed in years of diagnosing problems that other people had given up on. The attorneys on Arkway's side attempted twice to question his qualifications, and twice were reminded by the presiding judge that chain of custody and factual accuracy were the relevant standards, not professional credentialing. He was home by 7 o'clock. Mia had saved him half a bowl of macaroni and cheese, which she had made herself with only moderate supervision from the building's overnight property manager, who had been watching her. There was a crayon drawing on the kitchen table too, a picture of the two of them, identifiable mostly by the height difference and the fact that the smaller figure was holding what appeared to be a rabbit. He propped it against the fruit bowl where he could see it. He sat at the kitchen table and ate the macaroni cold, and thought it was the best thing he had tasted in a very long time. Outside the window the city made its ordinary sounds traffic, a distant siren, the neighbor's dog making a brief complaint about something. Ordinary sounds had never felt so good. The original custody petition was formally dismissed 11 days later. The judge issued a written ruling noting that the petition had been initiated by an entity Arkway Consolidated Partners, operating through Meridian Health Systems, whose motivations had since been demonstrated to be financially rather than welfare motivated. The ruling used language that would later be cited in 3 subsequent cases brought by families in similar positions. Arkway's principles were referred to the state attorney general and to federal prosecutors. 2 of the 3 managing partners had retained criminal defense attorneys by the end of the month. The other one was reportedly traveling abroad on an extended basis and had not been located. Jessica Carter resigned from Meridian's legal team within a week of the hearing. He thought about her sometimes, about whether she had known the full picture or only the piece she'd been given, about whether there was a version of her that had once wanted to do the job differently. He decided it wasn't his question to answer. Eleanor called a company-wide meeting on a Thursday afternoon and stood at the front of the room without notes. She spoke for 22 minutes. She acknowledged that Grace Medical Holdings, through its oversight of Meridian's partnership structure, bore responsibility for failing to identify and stop the conduct earlier. She outlined a series of structural reforms, an independent ethics board with subpoena power over internal records, a patient financial advocacy office staffed by attorneys reporting outside the billing chain, and a comprehensive audit of every legal action taken against patients in the past 5 years for collection purposes. She did not cry. She did not dramatize. She stated what had happened and what would be done about it with the same even voice she brought to every other statement, but the room was very quiet while she spoke, and when she finished, no one moved for a moment. Caleb was in the back of the room. He was one of the people who did not move. Afterward, she found him in the hallway. The company was dispersing around them. Small clusters of people with things to say to each other. She stopped in front of him and said, "The position you hold is permanent, if you want it, with a real salary and full benefits, including medical coverage for Mia under the executive family plan. That's not the condition anymore," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's an offer." He considered her. She stood very still in the way she always did. Waiting without pressing, the way someone waits when they've learned that pressing doesn't work on certain kinds of people. He thought he probably understood more about her now than she intended. "Do you want me to stay?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. And then, after a pause that was barely perceptible, "I think you're the only person in this building who would have done what you did the way you did it." She did not elaborate. She did not need to. Caleb Ryan went home that evening and sat with Mia while she ate dinner, and told him about a book she was reading at school, something about a rabbit who got lost and found his way back. She was animated in the way she got when a story had grabbed her, her hands moving. Cotton sat aside on the chair beside her for once. He listened to every word. He told her that evening, in terms she could hold, what had happened. Not the legal architecture of it. Not Arkway or the routing documents or the hearing. Just the shape of it. That some people had tried to use a wrong thing to hurt them, and that other people had helped make it right, and that she was not going anywhere. She was staying with him. She would keep going to the clinic for her treatments, and she would keep getting better, and everything that had been wobbling was now still. She considered this for a moment with the grave attention she brought to important information. Then she picked up Cotton and climbed onto the couch beside him and pressed her head against his arm. "I knew you'd fix it," she said. He did not trust his voice right away. He put his arm around her and looked at the window and waited for it to steady. Over the following months, Mia's treatments continued without interruption. The infusion center at the clinic began to feel familiar in the way that places feel when you've been enough times that the staff knows your name and the parking spot you prefer. Her inflammation markers improved. Her specialist began using the word stable with a confidence she hadn't shown the year before. Cotton began to spend occasional nights on the nightstand rather than in Mia's arms, which the specialist said was a sign of a child who felt safe enough to set something down. Eleanor Grace changed slowly, in the way that people change when they are confronting something they have held at distance for a long time. She did not become warm overnight. She did not arrive at the office with a different personality. But small things shifted. She began eating lunch away from her desk. She started asking, when she passed Caleb in the hallway, how Mia was doing, not as a formality but as a real question. One she paused to hear the answer to. He gave her real answers. One Saturday in early spring, Mia had a routine appointment, and there was a construction delay on the main road, and Caleb texted Eleanor to say he'd be late filing a report she'd been waiting on. She replied that it was fine, and then after a pause asked whether Mia needed anything. He said no, she was good. Another pause. Then, would they like company for lunch after the appointment? He stared at his phone. He wrote back, sure. They ate sandwiches at a place near the clinic with small tables outside on the sidewalk. Eleanor sat across from Mia and watched her eat and talk about Cotton and the rabbit book and a girl at school named Priya who was her best friend. Eleanor listened in the focused way she listened to everything. And once or twice, she said something that made Mia laugh, not trying to be funny, just precise in a way that landed as funny. Caleb watched them both. At the end of lunch, Mia slid off her chair and walked around the table and held out her hand to Eleanor, Cotton dangling from the other arm. Eleanor looked down at the small hand offered to her, and then, after a moment that was only a moment, took it. Caleb did not say anything. Some things are better left without narration. They walked to the parking structure together, Mia between them holding one hand on each side. The day was cool and bright, the kind of day that feels like a door has opened somewhere and let in better air. Caleb did not know what came next, not the precise shape of it, not whether this improbable collection of three people would hold together or drift apart, not what Eleanor carried in the parts of herself she still kept folded away. He knew only what he could see, which was his daughter walking between two people who had both, for different reasons and in different ways, decided she was worth fighting for. Some families are not built from the beginning. Some are assembled from wreckage, from debt and grief and courtrooms, and a routing slip misfiled on a Thursday evening. Some are held together not by origin but by choice, the repeated, daily, unremarkable choice to show up for someone who needs you to. Mia swung their hands as they walked. She did not know she was doing it. She was thinking about lunch, or the rabbit book, or Priya, or something only 6-year-olds can follow. But her grip was firm, and she held on to both of them, and neither one let go.